Dobre utro, good morning. Today we will have a PowerPoint presentation and recitation of the famous poet Vladimir Mayakovsky. The poet of his time and conscience inspired thousands to love people and admire the country with patriotic feelings for the cause of humanity. He was not only a famous poet, but an actor and illustrator too. He spoke and wrote for the common man and stood in support of them against oppression of all kinds. His work has been translated in almost all languages of the world, including in Bengali. Among them, the names worth mentioning are of Ram Bose, Siddheshwar Sen, and Buddhadev Bhattacharjee, the former Chief Minister of Bengal.
Good morning, everyone. No gray hair in my soul, no doddering tenderness. I rock the world with the thunder of my voice. Strolling, looking good, 22. Sensitive ones, your love is a violin solo. Cruder ones use a drum. But you can't be like me, inside out, all lips. Mayakovsky's penetrating gaze is equally matched to his penetrating, rebellious, defiant, iconoclastic verses. His thunderous voice does indeed shatter the prosaic world and makes our souls quiver animatedly at undiscovered lands unraveled by it. Mayakovsky was born in Baghdadi, Georgia, which has now been renamed Mayakovsky in his honor. He was born on July 19, 1893, and he was the youngest child of Ukrainian parents. Here we can see Mayakovsky as a baby with his sister. He writes fondly, though he was not very fond of idealizing or romanticizing, yet he could not help but speak fondly of his motherland, Georgia. He says, I was born in the Caucasus. My father is a Cossack. My mother is Ukrainian. My mother tongue is Georgian. Thus, three cultures are united in me, he told the Prague newspaper in a 1927 interview. For Mayakovsky, Georgia was his eternal symbol of beauty. I know it is nonsense, Eden and paradise, but since people sang about them, it must have been Georgia, the joyful land that those poets were having in mind, he wrote later. This is the house, the comfortable little snug cottage that he was born in, that is now in Georgia. When his father, a forester, died in 1906, the family moved to Moscow, where Mayakovsky joined the Social Democratic Labour Party as a teenager in 1908. Due to his family's financial situation, Mayakovsky was dismissed from grammar school. As a young Bolshevik activist, Mayakovsky distributed propaganda leaflets, possessed a pistol without a license, and in 1909 got involved in smuggling female political activists out of prison. This resulted in a series of arrests and finally an 11-month imprisonment. It was in solitary confinement in the Moscow Buturka prison that Mayakovsky started writing verses for the first time. This is Mayakovsky in 1910 when he was around 16 or 17 years old. His imprisonment was crucial to his artistic and political development, as he spent the time reading the classics of world literature. Nevertheless, upon leaving prison, he became a key figure of the artistic avant-garde in Moscow, becoming a futurist and artistic movement resolutely opposed to all that was old and bucolic, and which praised the city, speed, and modernity. As their manifesto said, we alone are the face of our time. Time's trumpet blares in our art of words. The past is stifling. Throw Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, etc. overboard. In 1911, Mayakovsky enrolled in the Moscow Art School. In September 1911, a brief encounter with fellow student David Berliuk, which nearly ended in a fight, led to a lasting friendship and had a historic consequence for the nascent Russian futurist movement. Mayakovsky became an active member and soon a spokesman for the group Hylea, which sought to free the arts from academic traditions. Its members would read poetry on street corners, throw tea at their audience, and make their public appearances an annoyance for the art establishment. Berliuk, on having heard Mayakovsky's verses, declared him a genius poet. Later, Soviet researchers tried to downplay the significance of the fact, but even after their friendship ended and their ways parted, Mayakovsky continued to give credit to his mentor, referring to him as "my wonderful friend." It was Berliuk who turned me into a poet. He read the French and Germans to me. He pressed books on me. He would come and talk endlessly. He didn't let me get away. He would subsist me with 50 kopecks each day so that I'd write and not be hungry. Mayakovsky wrote in I, Myself. This is his mentor and friend David Berliuk in the center, along with Mayakovsky. A few words need to be said about futurism. Futurism, Italian futurismo, Russian futurism, was an early 20th century artistic movement centered in Italy that emphasized the dynamism, speed, energy, and power of the machine and the vitality, change, and restlessness of modern life. During the second decade of the 20th century, the movement's influence radiated outward across most of Europe, most significantly to the Russian avant-garde. The most significant results of the movement were in the visual arts and poetry. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti coined the word futurism to reflect his goal of discarding the art of the past and celebrating change, originality, and innovation in culture and society. Marinetti's manifesto glorified the new technology of the automobile and the beauty of its speed, power, and movement. Exalting violence and conflict, he called for the sweeping repudiation of traditional values and the destruction of cultural institutions such as museums and libraries. The manifesto's rhetoric was passionately bombastic. Its aggressive tone was purposely intended to inspire public anger and arouse controversy. This is a futuristic painting by the Italian Gino Severini. The dancer depicted in the middle of the painting is composed of a dynamic intersection of lines and swirling fabric. 4 beams of stage lighting focus inwards on her, highlighting her as the center of the image, whilst in contrast, her rapid rotational movements radiate out in concentric circles to the edges of the pictorial plane. Each of these circular layers contains fragmentary images of musicians, instruments, viewers, and shapes, evoking musical notes and capturing an essence of the space in which she performs. This is yet another futuristic painting by Umberto Boccioni. Originally entitled Il Lavoro, it depicts the construction of Milan's new electrical power plant. In the center of the frame is a large red horse which surges forward as 3 men, their muscles straining, try to guide and control it. In the background, other horses and workers can be seen. The blurred central figures of men and horse, depicted in vibrant primary colors, become the focal point of the frenzied movement that surrounds them, suggesting change is born from chaos and that everyone, including the viewer, is caught up in the transformation. Finally, this is one of the futuristic paintings by Mayakovsky's mentor David Berliuk. It is called The Time. It was painted during the troubled times of the civil war in Russia. It conveys a sense of inevitability and rapidly approaching chaos. There are helpless human figures, houses, rails, poles, and wheels. The woman in the center is a passenger of a train that goes off the rails, and she is the personification of a country that is rolling into the abyss. It was important to understand Futurism as Mayakovsky was one of the leading practitioners and spokesmen of the movement in Russia. Mayakovsky's lifelong fight to identify, both in theory and practice, the poetics of Futurism with revolution per se cannot be dismissed, especially Mayakovsky's assertions that form is equally or more an expression of revolutionary spirit as content must be taken into account in every assessment of Mayakovsky's concept of Futurism. Form must not lag behind the changing rhythm of life. Mayakovsky turned very sharply against conventional aestheticism and tried to convey his poetic message with non-poetic or seemingly anti-poetic lexical, syntactical, and typographical means, thus providing new building material for poetry. This is an example of Mayakovsky's futuristic verse. As we can see, he is experimenting not only with the content, but also largely with the space, the writing space. Citizen, tax collector, excuse me for disturbing you. Thank you. Don't bother. I'll stand. I have here a business of a delicate nature about the place of the poet in the workers' society. Among storekeepers and property holders, I too submit to taxes and I take punishment. You demand from me 500 semi-annually and 25 for not sending in my statements. My work is like any other work. See how much I've lost. Look at. In the summer of 1915, Mayakovsky fell in love with a married woman, Lilia Brick. It was to her that the poem The Backbone Flute, 1916, was dedicated. Unfortunately for Mayakovsky, she was the wife of his publisher, the futurist poet and critic Osip Brick. The love affair, as well as his impressions of war and revolution, strongly influenced his works of these years. In 1918, Mayakovsky wrote the scenario for the movie Chained by the Film, in which he and Lilia both starred. His major works of the period included War and the World, 1916, a poem addressing the horrors of World War I, and Man, 1917, a poem dealing with the anguish of love. Neither could be published until after the revolution because of their anti-religious content. Mayakovsky was rejected as a volunteer at the beginning of World War I, and during 1915 to 1917 worked at the Petrograd Military Automobile School as a draftsman. At the onset of the revolution, Mayakovsky was in Smolny, Petrograd, from where he witnessed the October Revolution. He started reciting poems such as Left March for the Red Berets at the naval theaters with sailors as the audience. After moving back to Moscow, Mayakovsky worked for the Russian State Telegraph Agency, or the ROSTA, creating both graphic and text satirical agitprop posters that we can see on the right-hand side. In 1919, he published his first collection of poems, Collected Works 1909 to 1919. In the cultural climate of the young Soviet Union, his popularity grew rapidly. During 1922 to 1928, Mayakovsky was a prominent member of the Left Art Front, defining his work as communist futurism. One of the few writers allowed to travel freely, his voyages to Latvia, Britain, Germany, the United States, Mexico, and Cuba influenced works like My Discovery of America. He also traveled extensively throughout the Soviet Union. In 1924, he composed a 3,000-line elegy on the death of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. In the poem Kharasho, he sought to unite heroic pathos with lyricism and irony. In his last 3 years, he completed 2 satirical plays, Cloak or The Bedbug, lampooning the type of Philistine that emerged with a new economic policy in the Soviet Union, and Banya, that is democratic stupidity and opportunism under Joseph Stalin. In summer 1925, Mayakovsky traveled to New York, where he met the Russian émigré Elie Jones, born Yelizaveta Petrovna Zivert, an interpreter who spoke Russian, French, German, and English fluently. They fell in love. For 3 months they were inseparable, but decided to keep their affair secret. Soon after the poet's return to the Soviet Union, Elie gave birth to their daughter Patricia Thompson. In 1928 in Paris, Mayakovsky met Russian émigré Tatiana Yakovleva, a 22-year-old model working for the Chanel fashion house. He fell in love with her passionately, though she never reciprocated, and wrote 2 poems dedicated to her, Letter to Comrade Kostrov on the Essence of Love, and Letter to Tatiana Yakovleva, their silent, touching love story, which later sustained Tatiana in the most difficult of times, is overwhelming. Suicide had always been a prominent theme in Mayakovsky's poetry from the very beginning. On April 14, 1930, it became a fact. The brilliant iconoclast, anarchist, and passionate poet who revolutionized Russian poetry had shot himself. Gorky himself was to remember the incident rather differently. Shortly after Mayakovsky's suicide in 1930, he wrote, "I liked his verse, and he read very well. He even broke into sobs like a woman, and this alarmed and disturbed me. He complained that a human being is divided horizontally at the level of the diaphragm. When I told him that in my opinion he had a great but probably hard future, and that his talent called for a lot of work, he answered gloomily, 'I want the future today.' And again, 'Without joy I don't need any future, and I feel no joy.' He behaved very nervously and was clearly deeply disturbed. He seemed to speak with 2 voices. In one voice he was a pure lyricist, in the other sharply satirical. He was clear that he was especially sensitive, very talented, and unhappy." This is Mayakovsky's Death Mass by Sergei Merkurov. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria, for a wonderful PowerPoint presentation. I will now request Natasha Ghosh to read out the poem "Что такое хорошее и что такое плохо," followed by the English translation. Natasha.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Что такое хорошо и что такое плохо? Крошка-сын к отцу пришел и спросила кроха, что такое хорошо и что такое плохо? У меня секретов нет, слушайте, детишки. Папы этого ответ помешаю в книжке. Если ветер крыши рвет, если град загрохал, каждый знает, это вот для прогулок плохо. Дождь покапал и прошел, солнце в целом свете. И это очень хорошо и большим, и детям. Если сень чернее ночи, грязь лежит на рожице, ясно, это плохо очень для ребячей кожицы. Если мальчик любит мыло и зубной порошок, Этот мальчик очень милый, поступает хорошо. И если бьет дрянной драчун слабого мальчишку, а я такого не хочу даже вставить в книжку. Это вот кричит: не трожь тех, кто меньше ростом. Этот мальчик так хорош. Загляденье просто. Если ты порвал подряд книжицу и мячик, октябрята говорят: плоховатый мальчик. Если мальчик любит труд, тычет в книжку пальчик. Про такого пишут тут: он хороший мальчик. От вороны карапуз убежал за ухов. Мальчик этот просто трус. Это очень плохо. Этот, хоть и сам свершок, спорит с грозной птицей. Храбрый мальчик. Хорошо. В жизни пригодится. Этот в грязь полез и рад, что грязна рубаха. Про такого говорят: он плохой неряха. Этот чистит валенки, моет сам галоши. Он хотя и маленький, но вполне хороший. Помни это каждый сын, знай, любой ребенок вырастет из сына свин, если сын свиненок. Мальчик радостный пошел и решила кроха: буду делать хорошо и не буду плохо. I'll read out the English translation. What is good and what is bad? Tiny toddler told his dad, I am puzzled so. What is good and what is bad? Answer is, you know. Secrets I will always shun. Nothing could be worse. All that Papa told his son, I have put in words. If the wind tears down the roofs, if the heavens spout, that is bad. Why, even goofs will not venture out. Sun has conquered rain, and cold sun shines over all. That is good for young and old, good for big and small. The boy is black as pitch. If his face has dirt on, then his skin is bound to itch, and that is bad for certain. If the boy likes soap and water, toothpaste, brush and comb, then he's very good and ought to be a pet at home. Some boys bully, bite, and hit. Boys but half their size. Boys like this I can't permit words to advertise. Other boys will never strike smaller boys. That's good. Boys like this we're bound to like. That is understood. If the boy destroys and tears picture books and toys, each October child declares, what a bad, bad boy. If his eyes to books are glued, if he's never shirking, then the boy is very good, for he's fond of working. This boy met a crow and scampered in a dreadful funk. Our word. He is sorely hampered through his lack of spunk. Others would not be afraid to tackle birds of prey. Good. Such spunk is a mighty add to boys on life's long way. Some boys' shirts are black as ovens, yet the boys seem glad. People call them dirty Slovens. Don't you think that's hard? This boy's shoes are always shiny, just as shoes should be. Though the boy is very tiny, he is good, you see. All must grow from small to big. Nothing ought to balk us. Boys are bound to grow up pigs if the boys are balkers. Tiny toddler understood. Tiny told his dad, I will always do what's good, never what is bad. Thank you.
Jaguri Mukherjee to read out The Left March, a poem by Vladimir Mayakovsky in English.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So I'll be reading out the English translation of Mayakovsky's poem, Levy March, Left March. About turn, march, away with a talk show. Silence, you speakers. Comrade Moser, you have the floor. Down with the law which for us Adam and Eve have left. We will ruin the jade of the past. Left, left, left. Hey, blue jackets, be gone. Sail away, overseas. Or is there anything wrong with the keels of your battleships? May the vigorous British lion keep howling, frenzied and chafed. The commune shall not resign. Left, left, left. There, over the hills of sorrow, there is a land of the rising sun. For hunger, for the sea of horror, millions march one by one. May they gang up against us, to all their threats will be deaf. The Atat shall never suppress us. Left, left, left. Can the eagle ever get blind? Can they make us swing off the road? Hold your proletarian hand tight on the world's throat. Deck out the sky with grape. March boldly ahead. Don't be late. Who is marching out of step? Left, left, left.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jaguri. Now we'll be reciting, the students will be reciting the poem Kiem Buits. It is a poetry for the children. It will be read out by Tonusri Chatterjee, Ishita Sinha, Shashwati Manna, and Tanuj Gulati.
Thank you, ma'am. Vladimir Vladimirovich Mayakovsky. Kiem bit? У меня растут года, будет и 17. Где работать мне тогда? Чем заниматься? Нужны работники, столяри и плотники. Сработать мебель мудрено. Сначала мы берем бревно и пилим доски, длинные и плоские. Эти доски вот так зажимает стол верстак. От работы пила раскалилась до бела. Из-под пилки цеплются опилки. Рубанок в руки, работа другая. Сучки, закорюки, рубанком стругаем. Хорошие стружки, желтые игрушки. А если нужен шар нам, круглый очень, на станке токарном, круглый точим. Готовим понемножку, то ящик, то ножку. Сделали вот столько стульев и столиков. Столяру хорошо, а инженеру лучше. Я бы строить дом пошел, пусть меня научит. Я сначала начерчу. Дом такой, какой хочу. Самое главное, чтоб было нарисовано. Здание славное, живое словно. Это будет вперед. Называется фасад. Это каждый разберет. Это ванна, это сад. План готов, и вокруг 100 работ на 1000 рук. Убираются леса в самые лебеса. Где трудно работка, там бежит лебедка. Поднимает балки, будто палки. Перетащит кирпичи, закаленные в печи. По крыше выложили жест. И дом готов, и крыша есть. Хороший дом, большущий дом, на все 4 стороны, и заживут ребята в нем удобно и просторно.
Инженеру хорошо, а доктору лучше. Я в ответе лечит пошел. Пусть меня научат. Я приеду к Петре, я приеду к Поле. Здравствуйте, дети. Кто у вас болен? Как живете? Как животик? Погляжу из очков кончики язычков. Поставьте этот градусник под мишку детишки и ставят дети радостно градусник под мишки. Вам бы очень хорошо проглотить порошок и микстуру ложечкой, пить понемножечку. Вам в постельке лечь. Подпади вам компрессик наживет, и тогда у вас до свободы свет, конечно, заживет. Докторам хорошо, а рабочим лучше. Я бы вы рабочие пошел, пусть меня научат. Вставай, идти, к завод, и мы приходим на завод. Народа уйма целая, 1200, чего один не стелает, стелаем вместе, можем железо ножицами резать, краном дышащим, мало тяжести тащим, мало корову, столова правим, машинами правим. Работа свякова, нужна одинакова. Я гайки делаю, а ты тля гайки делаешь винти, и идет работа свек. Прямо в сворочный цех. Вольте лезьте, в дире ровнее, части вместе. Твей, огромный, там дым здесь, гром, громим въездом. И вот, лиза паровоз, что вас, и нас, и нес, и вез.
На заводе хорошо, а в трамвае лучше. Я в кондуктором пошел. Пусть меня научат кондуктором. Ездал везде с большой сумкой Казани. Ему всегда, ему везде в трамвае ездить можно. Большие идите, берите билеты. Билеты разные, бери любые, зеленые, красные и голубые. Ездим рельсами. Окончилась рельса, и слезли у лесами садишь и грейся. Кондуктор хорошо, а шоферу лучше. Я в шофере пошел, пусть меня научат. Верчит машина скорая, летит скользия. Хороший шофер, я сдержать нельзя. Только скажите, вам куда надо? Без рельсы, жители, доставлю на дом. Идем тудым, спути, ой ты!
Ведь шофером хорошо, а летчиком лучше. Я бы в летчики пошел, пусть меня научат. Наливаю в бак бензин, завожу пропеллер, в навеса, мотор, вези, чтобы птицы пели. Бояться не надо ни дождя, ни града. Облетаю тучку, тучку-летучку. Белой чайкой паря, полетел за море. Без разговору облетаю гору. Вези мотор, чтоб нас довез до звезд и до луны, хотя луна масса звезд. Совсем отдаленные. Летчику хорошо, а матросу лучше. Я бы в матросе пошел, пусть меня научат. У меня на шапке лента, на матроске и карья. Я проплывал это лето, океаны покоря. Напрасно волны скачете, морской дорожкой. На рег и помочьте, карабкаюсь кашкой. Вставайся, ветер южный, вставайся, буря скверная. Открою, польюсь южный, а северный наверное. Книгу переворуешь, намотай себе на ус. Все работы хорошие, выбирай на вкус.
Thank you, everybody. We will end the program with a recitation by a native. The poem is Послушайте.
Послушайте, ведь если звезды зажигают, значит, это кому-нибудь нужно. Значит, кто-то хочет, чтобы они были. Значит, кто-то называет эти плевочки жемчужиной и, надрываясь в метелях полуденной пыли, врывается к Богу, боится, что опоздал, плачет, целует ему жилистую руку, просит, чтобы обязательно была звезда, клянется, не перенесет эту беззвездную муку, а после ходит тревожный, но спокойный наружно, говорит кому-то: ведь теперь тебе ничего, не страшно, да? Послушайте, ведь если звезды зажигают, значит, это кому-нибудь нужно. Значит, это необходимо, чтобы каждый вечер над крышами загоралась хоть одна звезда.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I would also like to thank Shudipta Nondi for giving us the technical support, because without her, the program wouldn't have been possible. So thank you, everybody, for coming forward and making the program successful. See you next month. Thank you, everybody. Das Vidanya.
До свидания.